Good morning for much of the US. Good afternoon for, let's see, I guess on the East Coast and eastward of that, anyone who is zooming in from anywhere in the world. And I did see a couple people from Europe. Thank you for joining us today. This is a second of three-part conversation leading up to July 1st, which is is it U Day or some T Day, or it's some special day for us to find out what's actually going to happen with USMCA. And the first session we had a month ago had the three distinguished speakers that we have today, Thomas Cook, Carol Colombo, and Bill Edwards. There was a certain end result that I felt, from the speakers, and subsequently, I've heard different information and feel different information that things potentially could change. And so we'll see. Let's see how this conversation goes today. You're at Global Chamber. Global Chamber is an organization that's in 605 cities around the world. Today we have 7 events. And so we have over 800 events a year. But we're not an events organization. We're an organization that connects people to trusted resources or clients, or as Bill Edwards says, Global Chamber is the best networking organization he's ever met because he can speak to somebody on the ground in any country and get the real skinny. Because at the end of the day, the media is not going to give you what's real. Reading an article in any journal probably won't either. It's the contextual of that plus actually speaking with people on the ground that gives you the real information. Another piece, of course, is Bill Edwards puts out every 2 weeks. Here's what's going on in the world, with a special emphasis of about 40 countries where many of us do business. And so if you're not reading that already, you should. Bill Edwards has his own firm, Edwards Global Services. He's got 50 years of trade experience. He's been an expat multiple times. He's been everywhere. I feel good about myself in being 65 countries and having had a couple expat assignments. Bill exceeds that by far. And so, Bill, thanks not only for your past work, but all the work that you do today, not only leading your own company and helping companies like Randy's Donuts land in Tokyo successfully, but also the information you share in your biweekly report, and being involved in the community, like being the chair of the District Export Council for Southern California and putting on amazing events like you did a couple of weeks ago, the World Trade Week in Orange County. What would you like to share today, Bill, about USMCA? We're going to go around the room, start with you, go next to Thomas, then Carol will open up the floor for Q&A. And by the end of this 55 minutes, we're all going to be a lot smarter. Thanks, Bill, for taking the time, and thanks for all your support.
Well, thanks for that great introduction. Really appreciate it. This is actually my third USMCA panel this month. 2 for the Global Chamber and 1 for the National Association of District Export Council annual meeting last week, I think it was. This tells you something about how much attention this agreement is getting right now. The July 1 formal review date is not theoretical, it's here. Before I go into the 3 issues I want to cover, and then kind of finish with some new news that's just come out about this event or this agreement, I want to tell you where my perspective comes from. I'm going to address energy digital services in China. On energy, I spent the first 20 years of my career living and working in other places on oil and gas as an oil and gas engineer. On digital services, I served several years on the ITAC 10 International Trade Advisory Committee on Services for the U.S. Trade Rep. And on China, this is my 43rd year of doing business there after living there for 3 years in the 80s. So let's talk about energy first. Although Mexico imports 75% of its natural gas from the United States, it has systematically favored the state-owned energy companies, PHX and on the oil and gas side, and CFE on the electricity side, in bid projects, which violates the USMCA national treatment commitments. Permits for private energy projects for U.S. companies have been delayed. In fact, currently, the Mexican government owes U.S. energy companies of various types $2.5 billion that they have not paid for contracts that have been in place. So, in the 2026 review, you can expect U.S. negotiators to push hard for clear non-discrimination guarantees and stronger protections for cross-border trade. Going on to digital services, we've got a lot of unfinished business with Canada this time. Mexico energy, Canada digital trade. Canada put into place the digital service tax, which was a tax just on U.S. companies, 3% tax on digital revenues for Google, Meta, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Uber. It was made it retroactive. Well, the U.S. argued under USMCA, and this tax was canceled. But they then went on to put into place the Online Streaming Act. That's an interesting name. It requires Netflix, Disney Plus, and Spotify to contribute to and promote Canadian content and pay for it. Then there's the Online News Act. This is my favorite. It forced Google and Meta to pay Canadian news publishers for linking to their content. So going forward, you can expect the U.S. negotiators to ask for explicit prohibitions on discriminatory digital taxes across border, firm guarantees on cross-border data flows. The Canadians want to keep the data flow measured. It kind of sounds like the Chinese and what they do to internet control. Limits on data localization requirements and protections against content quotas. Issue 3, I'm going quickly here, is China. And China is the back door we cannot leave open. The overarching concern about China, about Mexico, and to a lesser extent, Canada, is that that they've become backdoors for Chinese goods, capital, and components to enter the U.S. market, circumventing congressional approved 301 tariffs. These aren't the funny tariffs that have been overturned by the Supreme Court. These are the legislated tariffs that can be put into place. It's a fun fact that China exports $120 billion worth of goods to Mexico every year, and Mexico only exports 10 billion to China. So you can see this as a problem. In fact, this imbalance has resulted in a rapid increase in Chinese foreign direct investment into Mexican manufacturing, autos, auto parts, electronics, appliances, steel, aluminum. In fact, it's created a little Hong Kong in Monterrey, Mexico, if you go there. It's very interesting. Chinese firms setting up nearshoring operations specifically designed to bypass the USMCA. Chinese steel and aluminum, for example, undergo minimal processing and then through Mexican companies are being exported as, quote, Mexican product, unquote, to the U.S. market. So you can expect the U.S. under the review to want tighter rules of origin, particularly in the auto sector, stronger ownership and control provisions that look through the Mexican legal entity to make sure who the actual beneficial owners are. Hint, very often Chinese state-owned enterprises. Here's what I found. Whoops, sorry. And clear mechanisms to exclude goods using Chinese components from coming into the U.S. Even when they're final assembly. So in closing, I'd like to talk about what's likely to happen with the USMCA this year. This is based on some new things that have been coming out in the last few weeks. You're probably aware that bilateral talks have already been going on between the U.S. and Mexico since March. And actually, at our World Trade Week event a couple of weeks ago, the local consul general for Mexico said that she'd been very heavily involved since March in bilateral discussions. Frankly, the USMCA is existential for Mexico trade, but Canada has yet to respond to requests from the government for even bilateral meetings. The Canadians seem to think they can exist without comprehensive trade agreements with the US. Good luck on that. So I think there are really three uh, likely outcomes based on various sources I've seen. One is a clean 16-year extension, not likely, not going to happen. Two is a painful extension with talks dragging into late 2026 over autos, energy, China enforcement. I think that's likely, and I think it's going to be impacted by our elections this fall. Uh, and three, no deal. And that means we slide into annual reviews under a cloud of uncertainty. And it means companies have to plan every year for possible changes in imports and exports into and out of Mexico. So July 1st is not a finish line. It's where the uncertainty begins. And my comment is to people, plan accordingly. Thanks, Doug.
Plan accordingly means what in this case? Wait,
Plan
or
for change.
are
Plan
there
for
things?
change.
Is there anything that
Well,
people should be doing right now?
they should be watching very carefully what happens in the initial discussions starting July 1.
Doug, I'll answer that question because first of all, a really good overview there. I could have sit and listened to you for another hour talking about this. You have it all absolutely 100% correct. The issue is that companies have to really feel as though there could be a real situation that we lose this agreement in total, or lose all the provisional benefits in total. And they have to ask themselves, well, what steps are they going to take to mitigate that issue now, right? Planning potential event that in the worst case scenario, this benefit will go away. An example is that if they move manufacturing to Mexico from China, um, 10 years ago into the program because of the benefits they get out of USMCA, they have to sit back and say, if I lose that benefit, what am I going to do? Which means they have to look at alternative sourcing. They have to, build a risk management strategy and say, where else could I get a competitive advantage, okay, in my manufacturing profile or distribution profile? And that's what needs to actually be done in each case. Because in the three options that you mentioned, either one of those, any one of those is going to be problematic for everybody who's involved in trade with both Mexico and Canada. Um, and I firmly believe, from my side of the review, is that there'll end up being an agreement in place in Mexico because of the huge dependence on Mexico on that agreement. But I don't think there will be a revision of the agreement with Canada, mainly because their Prime Minister Carney and Trump have become very antagonistic towards each other, and they don't seem to be moving. And another political event that's in play is that the province of Alberta has filed to secede from Canada, and they've received enough overwhelming votes from their population to be able to do that. And they're having conversations with the U.S. government in terms of possibly becoming that 51st state. And second to that is Quebec, who has always been a thorn in the side of Canada because of its relationship to France and the language of French being spoken within that province. Um, and they're also talking about succession as well, because they're not happy not only with the political aspects, but also the economic aspects as well. So I don't see the Canadian side being renewed, not in the short term. I do see the Mexican one, but I think the Mexican is going to be reformed significantly in all the areas that was mentioned previously. Um, and I think that the issue is going to be that companies have to strategically think, if I lose all of this or part of this, what are my options? And don't wait till July to do that. Really, they should have started this process last year. But if they're now confronting it, they should be very aggressively looking at alternative sourcing options and alternative manufacturing options. And foreign trade zones opportunity is one of those in the United States to compete successfully with manufacturing in Mexico. And I would add one more thing, add to it that Bill had brought up is this issue of China moving their manufacturing capability directly into Mexico. We're actually helping some Chinese companies accomplish that and enter not only into Mexico but into what's called the Maquiladora program. Um, and the issue now is that the president, through executive order, has issued the ability for U.S. Customs now to ask an importer for a bill of materials besides the commercial invoice and the packing list in evidencing the details of that product coming to the United States. And they've given specific instructions that that bill of materials is to individually itemize all the components and parts that make up the finished product, what their origin is, okay, and what percentage they are against the total. So if there's not a predominance of Mexican value add in that piece, then they can't take the position that it's going to be covered as a Mexican product and get the advantage of USMCA. And that's a physical occurrence that's happening right now. And I'll just throw in that this is also happening with Vietnam because China moved a significant amount of manufacturing into Vietnam as well. So there are two targeted countries now that President Trump is directly changing the concept of what's called substantial transformation. Substantial transformation says that where something becomes what it is, becomes the country of origin. The example would be if BMW makes a car in Germany, but the parts come from China, tires come from Italy, engine blocks come from France, and so forth, that when it comes into the United States, they can say that it was made in Germany because that's where it became the car. Okay. And Trump is challenging that provision that goes all the way back to 1789 of substantial transformation. Challenging that by asking for these bills of materials and changing how customs treats these circumstances. It's a major issue for companies that have moved from China into Vietnam and Mexico are now going to be challenged as to what is really the origin of the goods.
Thank you, Thomas. Thomas is the managing director of Blue Tiger International, and as you can tell, he knows his stuff. He's an extraordinary leader who's based in New York and specifically on Long Island. He's worked as a former CEO of River International in New York and Apex Global Logistics Supply Chain Operation in Los Angeles. He himself has led these initiatives, and now he's helping people, American companies, be successful internationally. And as he pointed out, he's helping a variety of folks understand what the laws are and how to make sure that they're well within the boundaries. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Bill, as well. Carol Colombo is the chair of the District Export Council in Arizona, which I'm proud to say is where I am a member. Carol's a leader who's put together some amazing programs, especially over the last year for the DEC in Arizona. And she herself has a long history of work between Arizona and Mexico in particular, but very, very global. Thank you, Carol, for all that you do. You spoke last month. You had a tremendous kickoff to this whole program and gave us a lot of the background and gave us a lot of what's actually going on. Great framework for us to start this conversation. Based on what you've heard Bill say and what Tom has said, and based on your own experience with the DEC and your own business, tell us, what else should we know?
Well, I guess I didn't prepare any formal remarks for this. The information from Bill and from Tom are, is straight up exactly correct. The things that I think are important right now is to understand that you don't need to give up hope because what we should all be doing right now is advocating hard for USMCA renewal, whether it comes July 1st or it comes, November 10th. It's very important to create some urgency around renewal of this agreement. And I have hope for this because USTR and the administration are all talking about their Western Hemisphere strategy, right? You can't have a Western Hemisphere strategy without a platform for that strategy, and that's what USMCA is. USMCA, North America, is the platform for a Western Hemisphere strategy that the entire administration appears to have as a priority. So I think it's important to understand that. It's important to understand that renewal is a step in the continuum that has to occur between US, Mexico, and Canada to enhance the competitiveness of this region over time. One of the things I think, just personal opinion, has been a problem is that we toss these, we do a lot of work. We create a trade agreement. This is essentially the most comprehensive trade agreement the United States is a part of. It's got the most forward-facing provisions, right? But then it's not like we walk away from it, but we don't manicure it regularly, right? There needs to be a more cohesive way of making sure that the benefits of the agreement are rolling the way they're supposed to. And that's a problem. We see all these things, they accumulate, right? All these issues with Mexico and transshipment, all these issues with Canada and data flows. And by the way, I do think Canada is very, that just as it's existential for Mexico, I think this agreement is existential for Canada. They're doing their work, but this is an incredibly critical market for Canada. I don't think that they disregard or don't place emphasis on the renewal. It's just that I think that we've really rubbed up against the wrong side of our rhetoric, and it's been unfortunate, right? So for all three countries, this agreement is very, very important. And what I'd love to see in the go forward is that we start focusing on North American exceptionalism instead of just the hard scrabble around USMCA renewal. There is so much opportunity to be better, to do better, to create this confluence of trade policy, national security, and industrial policy in a way that's coherent and makes sense and is integrated, right? There's some big picture issues that we need to be dealing with on a North American basis that deal with national security, AI, critical minerals, advanced compute. We've got all these resources, all this capability, and we need to figure out how to really leverage the gifts that nature has given us by geographic proximity and a shared democratic value system. It's very important that people understand what we have and begin to advocate strongly right now to the administration and to the USTR for renewal. Like in Arizona, right now, we're in the middle of an effort to get our entire congressional delegation to sign off on a joint letter to USTR. We should have that by the end of May. Our House, Arizona House, is going to do a similar kind of effort with their trade committee to do a bipartisan letter to USTR. These may seem like little teeny things along the edges. If enough of us do it, it sends a pretty significant signal. So my message is simply one of hope, right? It's really important that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is how I feel. Moving to bilats, there are some issues that should be bilateral. I mean, there's some defense-related issues with the U.S. and Canada where we have security relationships, where we could maximize the flow of people, professionals. We can maximize or we could reduce the friction on export controls. There's a lot of things we could do that are bilats that are related to Canada because we have this existing relationship like AUKUS and some of these other defense-related relationships. But regardless of what we do by bilat, we need this trilateral agreement to make it easier for all of us. And I do think some of the subnationals is also worth referencing, Doug. Like there's strong subnational relationships that are becoming more and more important as more friction happens at the federal level. Arizona Sonora is a perfect example of a fabulous subnational relationship that is enduring in the face of tensions at the federal level. The same thing's happening up on the northern border. I mean, there's some really good examples that could be integrated into the overall, concept of North America. So just some stuff to throw out there, a grain of hope.
Really good point. I've noticed many of the sister city relationships across the U.S. into Mexico, for instance. There's a lot more activity on the economic side this year. So that great points. I'd like to have a question, and I'm now going to also open it up for others in the audience to raise your hand and ask a question. We have about 25 minutes left, so we do have time for Q&A. I'd like to, besides the question that I'd like to kick things off with, I'd like to recognize several people in the audience that are on district export councils. Tracy Latham and Mike Patterson are both on the Arizona District Export Council, along with Dr. Martha Medina. Martha gave a spectacular conversation the other day about sales and marketing of products around the world. And I've heard her speak about exporting too, including at Global Chamber at our Export Import Forum. She not only knows how to do it, but she knows how to explain it. So thank you, Martha, for being such an extraordinary, successful exporter and teacher. We all learn from you every day, just like we're learning from these three superstars here on stage. And so I'd like to start the questioning with something that Thomas mentioned, the concept of doing something with Mexico where the part with Canada would be left alone. How does something like that work? What is the framework? Does that mean it becomes bilateral, or there's an overriding renewal, except there's some additional plus that gets done with Mexico? How does that kind of get implemented, Thomas? And anybody else that'd like to care to
Yeah,
take that?
I don't think that there's a very defined path that's going to follow. I think it's going to end up being a default position that happens,
Okay.
after the date expires. But um, Mexico and the United States, as Bill mentioned, has been discussing this whole issue since March. Okay, and in that discussion, okay, led by the Trump administration and obviously all the people involved in the International Trade Administration, is they're trying to get a better equity on behalf of what the benefits are to the United States. There are significant restrictions on what the United States can sell into Mexico and how money is exchanged in Mexico. Um, and the legal differences that apply, where we have a much more, I'd say, regulated and stricter environment than they have in Mexico. And they're looking to bring an equity involved in that relationship. I think everybody understands the benefit of outsourcing manufacturing in a lower cost market. Okay, but you can't also then restrict certain sales of U.S. products or services into that country. So I think at the end of that negotiation, there'll be a better equity for U.S. companies, and I think an agreement will be reached. The bigger concern that I have, as I mentioned earlier, is with Canada. And the only concern I have over Canada is we've got, 60 days and they're not even negotiating yet. As Bill mentioned, they haven't even come to the table yet and responded to the invitations to start this conversation. And that inequity that we have with Mexico is the same inequity that we have with Canada. We're restricted on things that we can sell into the Canadian market. And I make the very important point because I have a lot of clients up in New York State, up in northern Vermont, in northern Michigan, where we have a huge dairy industry, okay, and we can't move that product successfully across the border into Canada that competes with their dairy industry because we could bring it in at a much lower cost, okay, but they make it prohibitive that we can't do that. on the West Coast, the lumber industry is impacted on what we can do and sell and trade into Canada, same kind of restrictions. So those are negotiations that have to take place. But if they're not even talking, then that negotiation will be restricted. And we have the Department of Commerce, which is the International Trade Administration. We have the State Department, which is political, and we have the Treasury Department, which is financial. All three of these departments are part of this negotiation because there's implications to all the areas. As Carol mentioned, there's a huge defense mechanism that's established between Canada, the United States, and Mexico against the balance of the world, right? That has to be brought into this consideration, right? The amount of money that is transferred between the three different countries is huge and has huge financial implications, not only in the United States, but also in the whole world financial market and so forth. So this is not something that's, taken lightly. It's something that's very serious. So besides the contingency planning from a logistics and supply chain standpoint, I think everybody should be having conversations with their congressmen, with their senators, also at a state level and putting state pressure on the federal government, and also those that belong to trade associations. Almost every industry has trade associations, and they themselves generally have an ability to apply pressure in Washington. I think the more pressure that we put on, even though I think at the end of the day, Trump is going to be the decision-making center, I think there may be some levels of influence that can be weighed in. Um, and also individual companies, the senior executives that have potential, entree into the federal government at a higher level, or to the president himself, there has to be this massive amount of pressure that has to be put onto this to try to make this opportunity work out and be balanced out for all the countries involved. So those are the things that need to be done with each individual person in the supply chain and company in the supply chain.
Mike Patterson, I didn't mean to surprise you by spotlighting you, but we were talking about Mexico, and just in the last couple days, I'd already been hearing about all these the Chinese investment, and that some of the commercial real estate members who are part of Global Chamber are so busy with helping Chinese companies coming into Mexico. I don't understand that, other than going back to the substantial, what is it called? Substantial transformation
Right.
and hoping to be on the correct side of that. Mike, are you available to say any words about this? You're so deeply ingrained between the U.S. and Mexico and Canada as well. You spent 10 years in Mexico City and not only speak Spanish, but sing in your mariachi band. So you're an amazing attorney and just a human being that's extraordinary. But you're also very wise in terms of what's going on. What are some of the dynamics that you're seeing?
Well, thank you, Doug, and thank you for the kind words. In Mexico, China is tremendously interested. There are natural, as they are all over the world, in natural resources. In agriculture, in mining resources, and then the industries, as the example was given, how they're coming in and playing just under the radar, getting the amount of their participation in under NAFTA, under USMCA as it currently stands. In recent years, I was in Sinaloa with a delegation from Arizona. I had a client there that does agriculture and one of the big, large farming, and there was the Arizona group was there, and the only other delegation that was there lobbying the Sinaloa growers was a group from China. And my client came over to me at a social event and said, a social reception, and said, "Could you come over? I'm just not understanding what I'm hearing from this group from China, and I'd like to. Can you just filter it?" And I did, and came over and we talked. And he said to them, "Okay, so you're offering I currently produce 1x, okay, of chilies, bell peppers, tomatoes, etc., on all of my family's four generational lands. You're offering to give me the funding to create 4x. Okay. And then it said, what do you want from that? In exchange for all that money, are you wanting equity? No. Is this a loan? No. What does the China group get out of this? Well, we would get the 2x goes to China, and then you would be able to, the 2x and the 3x goes to China, but you can continue selling your 1x to the gringos at market prices, and you have another 1x that you can sell either to the gringos or to Europe at much higher prices to Europe. And then he said, so do I just give you the 2x and the 3x to China? And they said, no, you would sell it to us at market rates. And he says, this just boggling my mind. There's no loan here. There's no interest payments. There's no equity that I've given up. And it was very clear that they just wanted to secure a 2x and 3x for China, for just the agriculture period. But I mean, I've never been able to get that out of my mind since that moment. It did not go forward because they needed 40 people to agree, and they did not get it in their trip and have not gotten it since. But that showed me just, I turned to our delegation and said, there's just no way the United States can compete. Interests in the United States cannot compete with that kind of a negotiation. The power of the Chinese to go around the world and secure minerals, agriculture, natural resources is incredible. So that's one comment. The only other comment is, I have great respect for Carol Hill here. She's been leading us on behalf of the Arizona District Export Council, working with our delegation on both sides of the aisle to get letters to go to our administration and say that they're all on board, at least to these basic principles of let's get this approved. She also organized a call about a month and a half ago with the U.S. Trade Representative right across the street from the White House, and it was very quickly put together, and yet she had 30 people on the call. Unbelievable response. But the U.S. Trade Representative said, in the end, my takeaways from that call are, in the end, it is going to be the decision of the person across the street, on this, go, no go. And I asked a clarifying question. Let's say it is now July the 2nd, and we have not gotten the tri-country approval of this. And as you've observed, Thomas, they're not even negotiating in Canada. There's not even a discussion going on. So we know where that's going on July the 1st. On July the 2nd, what happens to the automotive goods that are trying to come across the border into the United? What happens on July the 2nd? It's not that the agreements, and his interpretation was the agreements go forward and there's an annual renewal. However, I think we all agreed that that day is not just going to come and go in silence. There are going to be dramatic statements made out of the White House on this issue, likely because of the antagonistic relationship. But Carol Colombo is the most hopeful person, and I appreciate her optimism and her leadership, and we're all behind you, Carol. And let's keep these letters going, and we're not giving up. Thank you.
Uh, Bill or Carol, any comments on what Mike said and what Thomas said?
Oh, my only comment is we need to multiply Mike Patterson by some, Malthusian math model, because we need more of that. The only real truth that I know is the day after is the same as the day before. So the agreement continues, right? The agreement continues. It's just the uncertainty. It's just the limbo that we live in. And this past year is a great example of how difficult it is. And it's not just limbo, it's what's coming from the tariff side on 232s or anything else that might get dreamed up. What's coming that just new holes into that trade agreement. So tariffs are a totally legitimate tool in the toolkit for national security and for trade policy. The question for North America is, are they consistent? Are they balanced? And do they respect the framework that's been built over the last 30 years, right? So how are those tariffs implemented in the go forward? Because I think there's, I don't know, Tom, you probably know better than me, but 7 or 8 ongoing 232s in very significant sectors, which could, make it just riddles the framework of the trade agreement because it creates additional friction around whatever those areas are. So, the bottom line is you have to keep working towards, and that's sort of where we are on July 2nd, if we can't get renewal on July 1st.
You used and brought into the conversation tariffs, and when Trump in the second month of his presidency last year brought out these reciprocal tariffs, okay, which obviously was eventually turned down by the Supreme Court. Mexico and Canada were brought into that. He just totally disregarded the USMCA agreement and put new tariffs on Mexico and Canada in reciprocity as he did across the whole planet. Okay. And then he used that base to then negotiate individual trade deals with every country in the world or region. Um, and um, we have a person on our team who listens to Trump all day long because we're paid to by certain companies to kind of guide them from a political standpoint, what the president's doing. And he firmly believes that he has succeeded in negotiating international trade, additional investment in the United States from foreign sources through this chaos and uncertainty that he's created in international trade. And all of us who are trade professionals in the world know that that's just not true, and that he insists that the costs were passed off to the sellers of the goods, not the buyers of goods. And we know in the United States that the wholesalers and the retailers pass those costs right on to the consumer, and a contributing factor of all the higher prices that every American is paying is coming from those tariffs. Okay. Um, and in talking to a senior trade administration, he said to me that Trump is so focused on the goal of increasing investment in the United States and increasing money moving into the Treasury that he's not concerned with the upside or the downside consequences of the moves that he's making. Okay. And he's already responded from being losing the case in the Supreme Court to additional 301 exposures, 232 exposures, and also looking at this new 122 area that he can address and so forth, because he firmly believes that tariffs is a way of negotiating trade that will eventually work better for the United States. Now, there is part of it that has worked better. He's gotten more than 57 countries around the world to lower their duty on U.S. exports. That's a good thing. Okay. And our export volume in some matters is up pretty significantly because of that. So that's a positive benefit of the activity. But the consequence side outweighs that benefit dramatically, that we're all dealing with. And the big issue is uncertainty. So I come back to a statement that I made before, is that everybody who is involved in supply chain has to bring risk management into their mindset. And in risk management, if you're involved in procurement and sourcing, you've got to have multiple sources today. You can't have where you're going to put all your eggs in one basket, which makes sense financially, You have to have several baskets now, so that as things change and that uncertainty continues on, okay, that you can shift quickly to where you're going to be buying from. Okay. And the same thing for exporters. Not depending upon if you sell to 5 countries now, you need to move that to 15 countries as quickly as you can, so you can shift your functioning sales depending upon the political and the tariff environment that we're facing. And that's really the most important piece of advice that everybody involved in global sales or global purchasing needs to be having their mindset, that there's a shift being taking place, that we have to change the way we think about our purchasing and thinking about how we sell.
Thank you, Tom.
I'd like to comment on that if I could,
Yeah.
Doug.
Let me
As
make one comment first, Bill. Sorry, Mila, I'm okay with the rest of this session, so you can jump back over to the Global Chamber of New York City and handle their concerns. That's an event that we're doing in 10 minutes. It's BMO Bank and CBIZ, seventh largest accounting firm in the United States, and they're talking about business fraud, which we're not talking about. We're talking about USMCA. So, Bill, if you wouldn't mind. Please continue your thought. Sorry to interrupt you there, and then maybe make any closing comments as well.
well, just a quick comment, segueing from what Tom said. Tom said that you need to diversify your supply chain. Guess what? Those companies that are 50, 60, 70, 80% dependent on Mideast oil are doing the same thing right now. They're looking at finding other sources of energy and other sources of fertilizer, because they no longer can depend almost 100% on the Middle East. And one of those big sources is the U.S. for oil and gas. But I'm seeing a lot in my analysis of what's going on these days in these companies that are like Japan, 75% diverse. What we see in USMCA definitely is a huge thing as far as looking for other sources. And by the way, there are other sources because the Western Hemisphere is largely independent of the Middle East as far as any energy sources. So we have in our hemisphere, we have big producers of oil and gas that are now becoming sources for Asian companies that were dependent primarily on the Middle East. So again, Tom, what you say is what I'm seeing: diversify your supply chain, or else.
Carol, would you like to make a closing comment, please?
Yeah, I would just say it's important to follow the facts. One of the facts is that the New York Federal Reserve Bank said 90% of all 90+% of all tariffs are being paid by U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers. The tariffs apply not just to Mexico and Canada, they apply all across the globe. So as you're looking at supply chain security, you really need to look at what the restrictions are in all the different places. And I think most of I don't know, Tom and Bill, you guys come in on this, but I think what you're really saying is look for U.S. sources for those particular insecurities. Maybe you're looking at other things too, but other parts of the world are subject to these tariffs, just like to the extent Mexico and Canada are. Mexico and Canada are not. We're not subject to IEEPA. They were not subject to the 122s. They were accepted. In the end, they were accepted. However, the 232s, they're having to deal with those and whatever the 301s that might be applicable. So I just say, it's a good move, as Tom's saying, to go look at your supply chain and reduce your risks. It's a better move. It's an additional move to also stay strong on advocacy for North America, because you need it. We all need it. A third of our trade is right here on our borders. So that's it.
Thank you, Carol. Tom, quick wrap up. We've got about a minute to go.
Yeah, I think, resonating on that is to appreciate the fact that there are certain things that are not available between Mexico, Canada, and the United States.
Mhm.
Um, so you have to seek elsewhere for various products and so forth like that. So, having a global economy is good. Um, the issue is that we're not dealing with a federal government administration right now that's putting out a international strategy of how we're going to handle trade across the planet. Okay. They're taking certain segments of it one by one and negotiating and presenting issues with countries politically, based on political events and so forth. So it's a very difficult environment for anybody involved in international business today. Um, the only thing I would say, again, coming back to the issue, is that, instead of chasing cost, okay, which is always a big thing in business, chasing cost, really try to obtain the best value for your spend as a better option, obtaining the best value for your spend. And in that mindset, risk is always evaluated. And in risk management, diversification is always the major solution to use. That'll be my final comment.
Thomas Cook, Bill Edwards, Carol Colombo, thank you for your knowledge and your wisdom and for taking the time to share it with us today. Thanks, everyone. We are starting another Globinar with BMO and CBiz on business fraud, starting right now. And so the information is in the chat area. And because of that, we're going to be closing the room down now. Thanks, everybody, for participating. If you've got questions or you'd like to reach out for more information, info@globalchamber.org, or send something to me directly, doug@globalchamber.org, and we'll be happy to help. Take care, everybody. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Bill.